How are we doing today? Hey, if you're watching us online, welcome wherever you're at in the world. We're glad to have you with us, and we're glad to have you with us today as we continue this series called The Elephant in the Room. And each week we've been talking about those elephants that kind of pop up and that oftentimes we're resistive to talk about in church because they're just kind of those topics. We've talked about politics, we've talked about sex, we've talked about a bunch of things. But today's topic has the chance to hit closest to home than anything else we're going to talk about today. Because it has everything to do with somebody you know better than anybody else knows. But to start us off, let me ask you kind of a real quick question to kind of get our minds thinking. I'll show of hands here, how many of you have ever heard some good advice from somebody else, but you resisted that advice because who the person was telling you? Anybody out there? Wives, don't point at your husband and elbow and say, that whole thing, she's right, but, how many times have we ever said, I know I should, when somebody says we ought to be doing this, but we kind of resist because we don't really want somebody else telling us that. We'd rather come to that conclusion ourselves, even though we at times have come to that conclusion, but haven't moved any farther away from it all. See, our big elephant today is this idea. Why do my problems always follow us? Why do your problems always follow you? And here's the answer. Right? And for some of us, that's a very deep point, because oftentimes we want to deflect, we want to blame. If this only worked out, if that person wasn't that way, if this had changed, but the reality is ultimately it comes back to you always seem to be this common denominator in so many of the things that go on in your life. In fact, one of the hardest things as a pastor is to sit and watch people make decisions that we know are gonna just put them off track to what they really want to accomplish. I think everybody wants to be happy in life, wants to have something good, but so often we watch and see people making choices, poor choices. And you've probably seen them too. I mean, it's not because we're pastors. We all see this at times, right? And it's not because we have a crystal ball. It's just that we kind of know how people are. You've probably been around a couple and watched how they reacted with each other, interacted, and thought to yourself, this is not going to be good. Maybe you've been in the office, and you've heard how one of your coworkers talks about their spouse or their boyfriend or their girlfriend, and you have thought, this is not going to last, right? Or you've seen somebody raising their kids, and you've watched how they're kind of doing stuff, and you thought, this is really going to get bad. I mean, let's face it, let's be honest. All of us are the best parents before we have kids, right? Isn't that true? But as soon as you have kids, all those great plans that you thought, Seema, you had it all figured out, right? My kid's not going to do that, right? My kid will never, and then you have a kid, and then you get a couple of kids, and then you get and they're all different, and you're having you are simply working on the fly, Remember a guy saying years ago, he said, when you have kids, you get one, you can kind of double team them, right? You get two kids, then you go to man. 3 or more, you are simply in zone. You're just hoping that they don't overpower you, right? But this whole thing and we see it, and you think of those times. You have the best advice for everybody else's life, correct? And if they only listened to you, right, their life would be so much better, right? Isn't that true? Amen. That's right. We say that in church. Amen. You can say amen. Even if you're not a Christian today, you just kind of came in because, she's cute or he's kind of nice or, hey, you popped in because you're here with your family. We can all say amen to that. You don't have to be a Christian to believe that, right? We have great advice for other people. We know the challenge for us is the advice others have for us. Because not only are we always there, the person who has the most to do with what you do is you. Because you really are always there. Now, I know somebody's thinking today, what a great day to bring my coworker, this is going to be real upbeat, I'm going to say it's you, in all office this week they're going to point to you and say, it's you, huh? And you're going to go, yeah, it's me. But I want you to understand that at least, so often when you look through the Bible and you see the stories and you see the the things that are written and the kind of things that people are trying to say, you ought to do this, you ought to do that, stop doing this, stop doing that. It is written from this idea because so often we are resistive to dealing with the one thing that could dramatically change everything in our life. And that's us. And we don't like to deal with us. We'd much rather deal with somebody else. Because when it gets to us, there is no other place to go for us. I think I've shared this idea with you before. There is enough unavoidable pain in life without us creating unnecessary pain for ourselves. So do you agree with that statement? I mean, there's stuff. And I mean, Jesus says this, in this world you're going to have trouble, period. Deal with it kind of thing. And it's like, oh, that's great, trouble. But it's this idea, there's enough unavoidable pain that happens in life. So why is it that we continue to create unnecessary pain for ourselves? We're going to try to discover that today, but before we go any farther, I invite you just to stop, take a deep breath, let it out too. Just take it in and out, and let's pray together, okay? Lord, in this moment of quietness and stoppage and rest, the thing that some of us so consistently avoid, I pray that you would not only remind us of who we are and what the basis of so many struggles in our life is, but I pray at the end of the day we will have heard your voice. And to know there is a different way, a better way, a way of freedom, a way of hope. And it really does come when we finally submit to hearing a voice other than our own. We finally submit to following what somebody else is trying to tell us. And I pray that as we leave today, that our agreement of, yeah, we need to do that, will match up with the response and reaction of our life to do just that. So, just be in this place and in this space, and most importantly, with each one of us, as we try to understand our own lives. In your name, amen. If you want to follow along, we're going to be over in John chapter 10 to start with. Every week we've kind of looked at something from that Jesus says or teaches or does, and then something that the Apostle Paul, the guy who wrote the vast majority of the New Testament, what he's kind of said on these different topics. And so today's no different. Today in John chapter 10, Jesus is teaching about sheep. And your response is just like mine. I have no idea about sheep. I know there are these little white things that go around. You get wool from them. Some people eat them. And when I hear about them, they're a pretty dumb animal. I don't know if there's much else to know about them, but that's kind of the summary I understand about it. So Jesus is teaching about sheep because there were a lot of sheep around Israel when Jesus is teaching. And people are familiar with kind of how it works. They weren't necessarily shepherds themselves, but they kind of saw shepherds around doing their stuff. And so Jesus has been teaching on this idea, and he's talking about sheep, and he's talking about gates, and he's talking about people that come and steal things, and people that are the rightful owners, and the right shepherd, and all this kind of stuff. And as Jesus is teaching this, he sort of stops in the middle and sort of tries to drive home this point about who is the shepherd of sheep is so important. And here's what Jesus says. A thief, he says, comes only to steal and kill and to destroy. Now again, remember he's talking about sheep here. So he's talking about a sheep thief that comes, and his whole job is to steal the thing, kill the thing, because he's probably going to eat it or take the stuff, and destroy it, destroy your livelihood, do all that kind of stuff. But behind this whole idea of talking about sheep and about some thief coming and stealing sheep, Jesus has a different point, a deeper point. And that is, a thief is anyone who steps into anyone's life and steals something, kills something, or destroy something. And the reality is, everybody in this room has probably had somebody at some point in their life do one of those things to your life, right? How many of you ever had something stolen from you? Man, there are a lot of thieves out there that are around you guys, man. I mean, that was a lot of hands, right? But, you think about stealing. Somebody steals your phone. Somebody breaks in your car and steals from somebody's car, breaks in your house, steals your wallet. There's not, but even beyond that, some of us have had our reputation stolen. Some of us had our innocence stolen. Some of us had our dreams and hopes stolen because of something that happened. We've all experienced somebody stealing something from our lives, right? What about killing something? I'm not going to ask you if you ever killed anything. I'm going to leave that off the table, right? And you're breathing, so nobody's killed you, but you have probably had somebody kill something in your life, right? How many of you have ever had a broken heart? Really, that's all? What kind of lives have you people lived? I'm going to give you another chance. How many of you have ever had a broken heart? Okay, yeah, that's much better. I feel much better now. First I thought, man, it's me and 6 other people, We have this little pity party over here talking about broken hearts. Everybody else is there, But that's this idea that something got killed in our lives, right? That there's this pain, something broke, and it ends up destroying us. We know the idea, we understand the idea that a thief is anyone or anything that steps into anyone's life and steals something, kills something, destroys something. That's kind of Jesus' big point here behind this thief. It's not just about talking about some bad guy over there that's coming. It's the idea that so many things come into our lives and try to pull stuff away, because he's going to talk in a different way in just a moment. But here's the question for you, and you're not going to like this part, trust me, but I need to ask it, okay? Who in your life has the greatest capacity to steal something, to kill something, or destroy something? You already know the way this is going, right? Because the answer is, so everybody raise your right hand. Gotta get the right hand here. Repeat after me. It's me. Right? Okay. We're all good then, right? Now, we don't like that, because we want a thief out there to blame, right? It's because they took our stuff, they said this stuff, they did this stuff. It's because of them that life is so bad. And I'm not trying to downgrade some bad stuff that other people have done to you, right? But at some point, and I've seen it way too many times with the people that I have tried to love and to care and to walk with them through life's crisis. There are just way too many times I've seen people who have made just bonehead, dumb, idiot choices. They have done things that they would come back later and say, you are exactly right, Mike, and I'm an idiot for doing this. And I always have a little party inside my head, Dave, like, hey, I got one, but you can't say that at the moment, they just kind of go, oh, that's a great deep insight for you, But so often we sabotage the very thing that we want. Because again, I think all of us want to be happy. We want to have a good life. But how many things, if we're honest, how many things have you ever sabotaged in your life? Messed up because of the choices or the thoughts or the processes or the things that have gone on. See, you have done more to undermine your own happiness than anyone else. And you have the greatest capacity to undermine your own happiness than anyone else. And I want to prove it to you in just a few moments, all right? Because you bought it, right? You leased it. You drank it. You ate it. You drove it. You dated it. Some of you slept with it. Some of you married it. Not pointing any fingers, not looking at anybody in particular, right? The reality is you did it. And all those things, that list hits everybody here. But how many of you ever bought something and later thought, why did I buy that? Anybody else with me on that, And then try to figure out some justification. Oh, it was a good deal, man. Really good deal. How can I pass up a good deal? What are you going to do with it? I don't know, but it was a really good deal, right? It felt good to have that really good deal. And for the moment, I was happy because I felt like I got a good deal. But now I got to pay it off. Here's the reality. We are heading into a terrible time for us over the next couple of months. Because Christmas is coming. And for some of you, Christmas is the worst time of the year, not because of the relatives, though that may be part of the thing, but not because of that, because how much over the top you're going to go with Christmas. I mean, I remember Lori and I, we were making the least amount of money we ever made. I was in graduate school, she was working, keeping me in a level of comfort that I was trying to maintain. We didn't have hardly any money, but we had to buy Christmas presents. You can't buy the cheap stuff, because everybody else is getting the good stuff. So we did the smart thing. We put it on a credit card. Because that's the way Americans do it, right? I don't got money now, but I need money now. I'll figure out how to pay for it later. Which, by the way, we did figure out how to pay for it later. And pay we did. You know when you make those minimum payments every month and you feel like you're doing something because it's the minimum, right? There's a reason they call it minimum payments, right? And they're glad to take your minimum payment because the rest of it just keeps getting bigger, bigger, and bigger. And so we had to work through a long time of getting through that to get to the place to be able to say, we are done with this kind of approach, right? But we all know it's coming. And all these things. How many of you have ever eaten something? You get down, we're coming up to Thanksgiving. I know I'm meddling today, but you're going to come to Thanksgiving. You have this great meal at the start. At least in our family, you have this big meal. Then you take a break, right? Just to kind of catch your breath, readjust things, right? Make sure everything's okay. Then you come back to the table because now it's dessert time, right? And when I'm with my family, we got 8 or 10 different pies, And everybody wants to try a different slice, just a little slice of that pie, right? Because I just want a little taste, right? And you get a taste of 10 pies, and then you decide seconds to really check and make sure that was your favorite, And anybody else with me says, you ate it. And you went into the holiday saying, this year is not, this year I'm going to keep it down because I don't want to gain, 5 pounds or 10 pounds over the holidays. Now, it's already. And a thief is anyone that steals from you, that kills in your life, that destroys something in your life. And that normally is us. But Jesus says that doesn't have to be the way it is. He says, that's what a thief does. And we have the greatest possibility to be that thief in our life. That doesn't have to be the way it is. Because he says, I have come that they might have life. Now here's a question for you. I want you to answer this for me. Who is the they that he's talking about? Remember what I said the context? Jesus was talking about sheep, right? Stay with me on this. We'll come back here. He's talking about sheep. So when he says, I have come that they might have life, he's talking about the sheep that he's talking about. Now, it does reflect to us. We'll get to us. But he's talking about sheep, and he's saying sheep for a very important reason. Because sheep are dumb animals. And he wants to remind them, that's who I came for is them. Sheep, which you are the sheep of his fold, but we don't like the idea of sheep when you really think about what a sheep is. A sheep needs a shepherd and a whole bunch of other things to keep them safe, right? They need a shepherd to say, hey, knucklehead, over here, this is where the good grass is at. Hey, psst, hey, get the dog, dog chase him over here. Here's the grass. Oh, bah, bah, everything's good now, bah, bah, thirsty. Over here's water, you got to take them. I mean, if you ever watch shepherds, it's like they got to keep moving them, because they'll keep eating the grass until there's no grass. They don't know what to do. And Jesus says, you got all these thieves that want to, but I've come that they might have life. And if you're familiar with this, he actually says it's more than just life. He says life in all of its fullness. Some versions will say abundance. The language here is this idea of something that's not only overflowing, it's more than we need. He says, I've come to give you life like Thanksgiving dinner, the best Thanksgiving dinner you ever had. Way too much stuff to eat today or tomorrow. The week later when you're still eating those leftovers and you're just tired of eating those leftovers. I mean, that's the kind of picture he paints here. This full. In fact, it's this idea that says, It's not the ordinary thing. I've come to give you sort of a different kind of life, an abundant life, not abundant in all the goods, but just kind of an overflowing, more than you can kind of contain life. That's what Jesus says, I have for them that I've come to give life for. And then he makes this statement. I am the good shepherd. Which kind of puts in your mind that there must be some bad shepherds, right? Because he's got to say, I'm the good one, which means there's some, bad ones. There's some, not so, they're kind of okay ones. But, he's the good shepherd. I'm the good shepherd. And then he says this incredible statement. The good shepherd gives, that is, he lays down his life for the sheep. And it's so easy to read this. Some of you have been around church your whole life. You've heard this, and you think, okay, yeah, he's talking about Jesus dying on the cross. He's kind of, but that's not the picture of Jesus. Again, he's talking about sheep. And he's talking about shepherds. And he says a good shepherd is the one that will throw their life in the way of anything harming those sheep. Lion comes, he's going to get in the way between those things. He's not going to go, it's just one sheep. It wasn't a very strong one. Let's not worry about him. Let's keep these old little plump ones over here. Those are the money ones. These other ones. He doesn't do that. It says the good shepherd. He gives his life. He lays. I love that language. He lays down his life. He throws himself in between those things because he doesn't want those sheep to experience what the thief wants to do to them. Which means simply this: if someone is willing to lay down their life for you, to give their life for you, they are for you. And you need to know that. I need to understand that. Because at times it is hard for me to recognize that he is really for me, especially when I consider how many times I mess up. How many times I don't live up to my standards, let alone his standards. How many times I think to myself, what an idiot you are. Why would you do that? Why would you say that? How many times have you ever gone away from a discussion and thought, oh, man, I wish I'd said that. Yeah. Or you're telling somebody else, I'm telling Dave later how we had this conversation went. And I said, man, I told him this, I told him that. And you didn't tell him that, but that's what you thought in your mind later, that you should have told him. But it just sounds so much better when I'm telling the story than to tell him really what happened, which was, I didn't say anything, See, you are the sheep. Left to yourself, you are going to get nothing but trouble. And some of you have experienced that. And I can say you're a sheep because I recognize I'm a sheep. And the reason is that list we looked at earlier, right? Because you have bought it, you have leased it, you have drank it, you have eaten it, you have drove it, you have dated, and some of you are glad that's where the list stops because that list could go on and on and on, right? See, at times, you are your own worst enemy. And for us to see that and to believe that and to live like that really is the place that God wants us to get to. Because he doesn't want us to be our own thieves. He doesn't want us stealing from ourselves, killing ourselves, destroying ourselves. Here's the good news. But you are not your only enemy. But I throw this up now because if I threw that up at the start, everybody would have gone with that one, right? Am I my worst enemy or somebody else my worst enemy? Which one should I take? This one's going to win every time, right? Because we have our list. We have our names. We have our people. We have our things those are our worst enemies. But it's true. While you are your worst enemy, you are not your only enemy. There's other enemies out there. And the Bible talks about this idea of sin and this stuff that kind of happens in us and happens in other people. But here's the thing we need to understand. Why is it? Why is it that's true? Why is it that we're enemies to ourselves And there's other enemies in our lives. And I believe it comes down to this thing that we wrestle with that Paul will talk about in just a moment. But the reality is that we mix up pleasure and happiness. See, we believe that if we experience pleasure, it will lead to happiness. When in reality, if we shoot for happiness, pleasure will come. But pleasure doesn't always lead to happiness, does it? And we all recognize that. We all have stories about that. Whether it's been us or somebody close to us, who in that moment of seeking pleasure sacrificed their happiness. Because the difference is, pleasure is an immediate thing. Happiness may not happen today, may not happen next Tuesday by 10 o'clock, may not happen for the rest of this year. But it's a long-term thing. But it gets us to the place where we really want to be, but we think, that's where I want to be, but in order to get there, I just need something right today. And I can prove it to you. How many of you, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand because I don't want to be insensitive today, so I won't ask you to raise it, but just think in your mind, raise your hand in your mind, but don't let your arm go up with it, all right? How many of you have ever gone on a diet? Don't raise your hand. And how many of you in the midst of going on a diet either said something to the effect of, I'll begin tomorrow, or I've done so good in my diet, this great, gorgeous, triple-deck chocolate cake can't be that bad for me. I need a reward. Or, this is tougher than I thought. Maybe I need to search for another diet. Or I'll just skip this day. I'm not looking at anybody. I'm keeping it up here, right? But you can substitute another word for diet, right? So often, in our pursuit of happiness, we want to get to a place where we're not only healthy, but we feel better about ourselves. It's better for ourselves. But to get there, sometimes to get to happiness doesn't always include pleasure. But ultimately, when you get to that happiness, pleasure comes. But oftentimes, we short-circuit by saying, I want my pleasure, and I want it right now. Because pleasure feels good right now, but so often pleasure is anti to what's happening in happiness. See, when we prioritize pleasure over happiness, ultimately, we don't get either. Because they sound so close and they seem like they're so related. And they are related in the right way, but in the wrong way, there's no way to get them. Because one leads to the other, but the other undermines the one. So, let's go to Paul. Paul starts off, and he has these conversations all the time in his letters, when he says these words, surely you know, which is always kind of code for, come on, guys, really? Right? Surely you know, come on. This is not rocket science. This is not that hard. Surely you know, he says, that when you submit yourselves to someone as obedient slaves, your slaves are the one you obey. Now, we don't like language of slaves. We don't like the idea of being a slave to anybody or anything. Servant, that whole thing. We don't like that kind of stuff. But that's where Paul goes. And he is in a context that people had slaves. And that is the language he's using here. It's a language of slavery. And he's saying, surely you know this, that when you submit, and he's talking about submit, this is not somebody who comes along and forces you into slavery. This is somebody you submit to. And in those cases, in their culture, they would have some people say, you know what? My life is a mess. I'm under debt. I can't get stuff together. I'm willing to submit to you. I'm willing to become your slave so that I have a regular income. Life goes okay. My family has something. I'm going to submit to that. That's the kind of context he talks about. He says, don't you know that? Surely you know this. When you submit yourself to someone as obedient slaves, you're the slaves, the one you obey. you submit, when you choose that, enough times we don't choose to be a slave to something. But most of the things we struggle with are things that we started choosing, and then at some point, we lost the ability to choose. You know, it's just a glass of dinner, just something before I go to bed to help me sleep. You know, just so stressful, and just to blow off some steam right now, and I just need this kind of thing, and just to kind of get it, and then pretty soon, you know, you do it enough times that it is no longer your choosing. Now, as Paul says, you've kind of become a slave to that. You can't break that because you submitted at the start, and now it's got its claws in you, and that's where you find yourself. See, when you choose over and over again, at some point, you no longer choose. Some of you know exactly what that's about, and how much you wish you could choose. But you chose at the start, and now it's no longer there. See, when you give up control, you are a slave. And we can be a slave to lots of different things. You know, oh man, I'm just, stuff's going crazy. I'm going to go shopping. That's the way I'm going to blow off some steam. I'll go shopping. I'll feel better. That's my pleasure thing. I'm going to go buy something. I'm going to feel good for at least a little bit till the bill comes, right? Or I'm going to go do this. I'm going to give her a call. Hey, it's late at night. I'm not feeling good. I'll call her up. Hey, because I want to feel better right fast. And then Paul makes this incredible statement. He says, listen, you can follow. That is, you can be slaves to sin. You can go that way. You can choose that path at the start, and then it kind of sucks you in. You can follow that, but it brings this idea of spiritual death. And you know exactly how that works. And when you choose something, you've experienced this well, that choosing something, at some point you have to choose a little bit more, because what used to give you pleasure doesn't give you pleasure anymore. I'm always amazed at these people that do these extreme sports. And if you listen to any of their stories, you discover that they used to do this kind of thing. But after a while, it was like not such a big deal. I got to do something a little more. I got to get that adrenaline. I got to push myself. So they go do some really stupid stuff, And we look at it and go, what kind of crazy? But you listen to the story. That's where the story's at. This wasn't working anymore. I had to up the ante. And once you up the ante, once you need more and more and more, you are no longer in control. He says you can kind of follow that, or you can obey God, which makes you right with Him. That is, leads to righteousness. That's what that idea is. That it's not just right living, but it's this right connection with God. There's no separation. But he says basically, listen, all of us will be slaves to something. All of us are slaves to something. The sad thing is, you have a choice with the one. The other one, you have a choice at the start, but at some point, you'll probably lose that ability to choose. Every day, Paul would say, you offer yourself as a servant to something. Every day. That doesn't mean you sit down in the morning, the first thing in the morning, you're eating breakfast, and think, this is what I'm going to be a servant to today. This is what I'm going to follow today. It doesn't always happen like that. It just kind of happens. That's how life kind of gets going. But every day we're choosing who we're going to be a servant to. And Paul would simply say, listen, choose the one that will bring you true happiness, because ultimately I think that's what we're all about. That's what we're after, and that's what Jesus promised. I have come that those sheep who need somebody, right? Need somebody to guide them. Need somebody to direct them. Need somebody to take care of them and to comfort them. Need somebody to protect them. Need somebody to stand up and fight for them. Those are the people that I've come to give life that has this kind of overflowingness. So that's a different sort of life than just a normal life. I love this statement by Andy Stanley. He says, following Jesus will make your life better, and following Jesus will make you better at life. And isn't that what we're after? A better life? But our problem is that we tank it ourselves because we think getting a better life is about experiencing pleasure, when in the reality it's about experiencing happiness. And those are two dramatically different things, though they are related. But the big elephant in all of our rooms is the person you look at in the mirror every day. Unless you're a 12 or 13-year-old boy and you haven't looked in a mirror in weeks. But for most of us, right? For most of us, that's who it is. And I think the great news from what Paul is saying when he says you got to choose and figure out which one you're going to kind of follow, and what Jesus says, the news is that God is there. That Jesus is there. That Jesus really is the good shepherd. The shepherd that will lay down, that he will give his life for you. While he gave it on the cross, I believe it's more than that. I believe that even today, Jesus gives his life for you. He lays down his life for you. He protects you. He throws himself in the way of those kinds of things because if you're one of his sheep, his job, his number one and only job is to take care of every sheep in his fold and to do whatever he has to keep them safe, to keep them protected, to keep them well fed. So let me just close by this. Let me get real personal here because I've already gotten personal today, so why not go all the way, all right? What have others been trying to tell or show you that you've kind of been resistant to? Because it's her that's saying it, it's him that's saying it, it's the boss, it's my parents, it's my kids, it's who is trying to been saying something to you that you know is the right thing you need to hear, but you've been resisting because of who it's coming from? To maybe ask it a different way, what has God been trying to say to or show you that you've been resisting? Because the reality is, God often speaks through other people. And some of you have heard the thing you need to do, that you know you need to do, and you've heard it over and over and over and over and over and over, and it's just this nagging, and whoever it comes from, it's just there. What is preventing you from today saying, you know what? It's not about who it's coming from. It's about it being the right thing, the best thing for me to do. And today can be that day. Because again, it's about choice. And it's about saying yes. That I'm going to listen to God and I'm going to respond to God. Because I'm either going to follow him, obey him, kind of be his servant, or I'm going to be a servant of all this other stuff. And I know where that other stuff has gotten me.